ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming to the senior thesis. This is our first senior thesis, and it's Bernadette Jordan. So our judges for Bernadette Jordan are Christina Newland, Tyler Newman, and Sarah Taylor. Bernadette will have 5 minutes to share her abstract on her thesis, and then the judges will have 20 minutes to ask whatever question they would like to clarify, disprove, or just get a little bit more insight. So I will hand it over to Bernadette in just a moment.
Right, thank you for the work you've put into this, Bernadette. We're looking forward to hearing more about your argument and the research process that you took. If you could like briefly restate your thesis and what you most want us to understand. Thank you. That was clear. You talked about ambition and you defined it in your abstract. You also defined it a lot in your paper. If you were to define it in your own words, like how would you define ambition? Again, just so that we can kind of track with what's. No, yeah, for you, like how would you personally define ambition in your own words? I don't want to monopolize questions. If you guys have questions, you can.
Yeah, so similarly, just this kind of two-part, it goes off of the one that was just asked, but could you speak to the role ambition has played in your own life and the lives of your peers that it led to this thesis? Yeah, thank you. Kind of pairing off of that, could you speak to your own journey then with social media and the toll it's taken on you and your peers, where you see that intersection with ambition impacted?
So, in your presentation and in your essay, you talk about goals and having good, productive goals. So, one thing I wanted to ask you is, how would you define a good, productive goal? Another thing that you mentioned in your essay and that you brought up today, you cited that it creates a dopamine imbalance in people, and that imbalance leads to decreased ambition. Would you argue that ambition is a chemical reaction similar to dopamine, or is that something different? Another thing, you let me find the right one here. Let me ask you this: could you tell me the story of what led you to choose this topic and what inspired this for you?
Thank you for that answer. Throughout the paper, you also integrate several points of causal research on the detrimental impact of social media on overall health and well-being, like the impact of dopamine. How did you decide which of these studies was most core to supporting your claim in regards to increased ambition and reduced social media? Was there one that you felt was the most helpful in promoting that thesis?
So kind of along that same lines of your research, did you come across anything that challenged your position as you were researching? So if you're arguing it causes reduced ambition, how would you respond? And you probably saw this in some of your research. How would you respond to someone who says it correlates, but it's not causation versus correlation? How would you argue that?
I mean, I would just say, like, it really, like, the studies really do support it. Like, it's like if you look at, like, before social media and after, it's like all these things rise up. And also just, like, people doing isolated studies of, like, oh, like, let's have these people do 30 minutes of social media, and then let's have these people do 5 hours. Or, like, let's have these people do nothing social media, and let's have these people, like, do 2 hours. Like, you can, like, the differences were, like, people were happier and people accomplish more and they have less distractions. So I would just say that, like, the data really does support it, and you can see it through, like, there's been studies on this, and it really does show, like, it might not be the only thing causing it, but it definitely is a part, and definitely something that needs to be paid attention to.
You argue that social media encourages negative values such as pride, laziness, etc. Could one propose that it is the fault of the consumer that their content is pushing negative values, since content creation or since content feeds are driven by user interests in social media?
That's a really good question. I mean, there definitely is an aspect of that because the algorithm, like you said, people, like, it tries to hit you with things that you're interested in. But I would say, like, even when we have structured, like, part of it is, like, the dopamine and doom scrolling, and, like, having, like, self-centered, like, pages, like, having your, like, bio and everything. And then also just, like, the content, like, even though there is some sense of individual part to a For You page, like, people still see a lot of the same stuff, even though it is a little bit different. So I would say that, yes, like, in some sense it's, like, uneasier, but in another sense it still is being promoted, and, like, we don't have that much control over what we see, kind of in a nutshell.
In your solutions section, you suggest limiting social media usage. And I'm just curious if there was any evidence-based research that you found that showed effectual limits in terms of what do those limits look like. Curious because in this whole conversation, voices like Jonathan Haidt and this conversation around the great rewiring of the brain, and the impact of social media and the ways in which it's very easy to get around screen time limits and kind of override those. Curious if you saw any evidence-based research that showed effectual results in that area.
I mean, what I would say is the best option is for somebody to, like, get off the apps as much as possible, and, like, if they need to be on them, like, download, delete, like, try to, like, stay out of that world as much as possible. But there definitely are people who, like, can't who can't do that for whatever reason. And yeah, like, I agree, like you said, like, it's so easy to bypass
On the topic of ambition, would you argue that ambition is more nature, that you are predisposed to be ambitious, or would you propose that it is nurture in the environment that one is in?
Half and half, maybe. I mean, there's no way to like see everyone like their ambition levels, but I would say that a lot of it is one of the like ambition is something like if you spend time around people that are ambitious, like you become ambitious. It's just because like having that motivation from other people is really important. Also just like making good habits and um, even though like you kind of feel ambition with your habits, but it's just it is like an environment thing. Like if you're around people who um, don't have any aspirations, don't have any motivation, like naturally you might feel it. Um, so yeah, it definitely is like an environment thing.
What would you say are the three, like just three of what you would see as the main contributing factors to someone being more or less ambitious
Um,
from a nurture standpoint?
yeah, yeah. I would say um like surrounding themselves with like bad voices, whether they be like their own voice or just like people who aren't really doing fun, getting themselves in enough entertainment there. So just like closing your mind off. I would say also not like not having good habits as like exercise, eating well, just things that are overall gonna help you be better and live like a better way from like meaningful and healthy perspective. Then I would say third is um I don't know. I mean I would put social media in like really big categories. I would say third is like um I mean I guess like one of those ways is like to bond along the way. Um just really like asking him like what he thinks you should do or spending time around him. I would say that that's like the biggest thing to nurture ambition and make sure that your ambition is directed to the right place.
This will be my last question for you. If you were a legislator in our government, what would you propose be done about social media from a legislation standpoint?
This is one of my biggest things that I was thinking of. Like, is it kind of crazy to ban social media? I would say definitely putting more warning labels on it, like especially for young people. A lot of young people are exposed to bad things, or they just like their parents don't know what's going on these apps. I would also say, um, like an age limit maybe on the apps so that like young people are kind of protected until they can kind of like know what they're getting themselves into. I know there are age limits, but they're very easy to bypass. Like it's 12 and up, but like still 10-year-olds have Instagram commonly. Um, I would say, um, I guess I would probably I think the biggest thing is taking away the short form content that's like endless scrolling and make it more like educational. I know that like they've tried to do that. Like TikTok has a STEM um, part, but like nobody's on there. And like when people have access to it, like they're going to use it. It's I don't know if banning it would be the best idea or like it would be like a long path I think to get there, but I think definitely putting limits and just changing the ways that the apps are programmed would be my biggest.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. That's our time.
Thank you.
Thank you all. That was Bernadette's, and Charlotte's will be next. So you guys can get up, and we have a 5-minute break.
Testing, testing. Yeah. Once it's on, it just wasn't on. Like,
Hello, 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 hello.
You need to speak loud too.
I do speak loud. I'm a very aggressive person. Okay. Is this good? Do you know if this is working?
is it on?
Um,
I'm just gonna turn it up a little.
yeah, okay. My dad's here. Hi. Dad. I'm about to go up. Hi.
Have a good.
Bye.
Have a good.
Hi. Bye.
Testing. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. If you could find your seats, we're begin in just a moment.
Here. Okay. Hello, hello, hello. Is this good?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is Charlotte Lewis's thesis defense. She will have 5 minutes to present on her 20-page paper, and then these judges, Larry Geisler, Hannah Newman, and Beth Pruitt, will have 20 minutes to ask her clarifying and maybe some interrogation questions. So, Charlotte, over to you.
Perfect. Imagine that there are 3 gardeners. Each of them are given their own little tomato plant. Of course, they want this tomato plant to grow big and strong. The first gardener looks outside and sees the horrible rain and the vicious bunnies outside and goes, "That is far too dangerous for me to place my tomato plant outside." And so this gardener keeps his plant inside, protected from all dangers, all issues, and insured within its own safe home. The second gardener sees all this danger, all the wind, all the rain, and goes, "Well, my plant will surely have to endure this. I best teach it now. If it has to endure it, it's better that it learns on its own. I can't really teach it." And so the second gardener places the plant outside and has the plant learn on its own. Now, there is a third gardener that looked at the wind, the rain, the rabid beasts outside and says, "That is quite dangerous. I best teach it how to deal with it." And so the gardener places it outside for a time and then brings it in during the cold weather. Now, of course, I'm not here to talk about tomato plants or anything like that, but rather one of the most difficult things for a person to figure out, how to parent their child. Now, there are many difficult areas to pick from, but there is one example that we should live everything by, and that is the most perfect parent we all know, God our Father. He parents us as the third gardener did. He lets us experience trials and difficulties, but still protects us and gives us what we need when we need it. Now, when picking parenting, your parenting style, many pick the wrong, ungodly one. That is the one that does not lead the child in the most faith-filled life. Now, I will be addressing the first gardener, which is the over-controlling gardener. This is the one who insists on the child relying the most on them. They restrict them from life in that they control every aspect that the child lives into. They control every area that they walk into and everything that they see, touch, and hear. And this parent is not leading their child into maturity, which is the ultimate goal for a parent, to lead them in maturity in Christ. If you over-control your child, you are not teaching them to withstand the winds, the rain, the rabid beasts, but rather you are teaching them to be weak and not search out how to strengthen themselves. Immaturity is caused by over-control because you are forcing them to rely on you, and therefore they have no strength of their own. Now, maturity is the most important thing for a child because that is the basis on how they will live the rest of their life. Maturity is how you pick your faith, it's how you pick your people, and it's how you pick your choices. If you are immature in that, meaning you are unable to do it in a wise manner, not according to your feelings, but according to what is truly best and according to what is godly. If you can live in a mature way, then you will live godly. Immaturity is being tossed upon the waves by your emotions, constantly hearing other people's opinions and letting that influence you. And it is not being able to stand for yourself when trials come. Trials are promised, the winds, the rabid bunnies, and the cold weather is promised. But it's whether we are taught to withstand is the most important thing. Now, I'm saying this all because this is such a simple yet difficult thing to say. That this is so common in our Christian community today. That over-controlling is deemed as perfect and acceptable and the priority. That you should protect them from any issue, danger, or harm that could possibly happen within their day. And that will then lead them to an inability to live on their own for themselves and in Christ. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Charlotte. Reflecting on this process of writing a senior thesis, what did you find easy or hard, and how did that compare to your expectations of the process?
So I've been thinking about my senior thesis for years now. And at the beginning of senior year, I had already thought that I had come to the senior thesis topic that I wanted, which was going to be focused on sports and the effects on making them into leaders. And so my most difficult part was that wasn't a complete idea. And so it was more refining my idea was the most difficult. Not the writing, not the researching, not the creating of the arguments, but the actual defining of the words of what I wanted to say. I would say that was probably the most difficult thing that I dealt with because I just couldn't break apart my thoughts, and it was a long process.
And what was the easiest part of the process for you?
So I would say the easiest part of the process was the writing, because I had already spoken about my thesis so much, and I had already talked with so many parents, and I had already turned it over in my mind. By the time it came to writing it, I just shot it all out, and it was quite enjoyable to write the 20 pages because it's just putting my thoughts into what I was trying to communicate.
And how do you feel like this process of doing this project of senior thesis has shaped you as a person?
So I experienced a lot of trials when writing my senior thesis. For those who don't know, I lost my original senior thesis paper 2 weeks before it was due, which was not great at all, and so I had to rewrite it within 2 weeks. And that was the most character building thing I've ever had to do, with school, because I just had to sit there and go, okay, it's time to do it all over again. And I had to redo all the things. Thankfully, I kept all the research stuff because, of course I had to source it all, but just rewriting everything and rebuilding it up. And in that, I was able to write an even better paper.
What did you feel like was your strongest argument in your thesis?
I would say my strongest argument in my thesis was probably the defining of an over-controlling parent. Because in the structure of my thesis, I first defined what an immature child was, but then I went into the over-controlling parent, and you could clearly see the connection after defining the previous, in that how I defined it as they forced total reliance, which then showed with the immature child how they could not rely on themselves, how they were constantly looking for other people to lean on, and how the over-controlling parent forced reliance, forced connection, and forced complete like connection to them with everything that they did.
Your definition of an immature child is one who cannot make wise decisions on their own accord and lacks consideration of repercussions of said choices. Every human begins their life by this definition. When would you say a child and consequently a parent should be judged by that standard?
Like what age they should first be judged by.
Mhm.
So that was a big thing when breaking down, like, when should a child first become mature? And I think that you should always be growing in maturity no matter your age. That is the entire point of having a child, is you're teaching a crying, whining baby how to regulate their emotions. You are teaching a crabby toddler how to realize that not everything that they want is what they get. And that's kind of your entire point as a human, is to mature. And when Paul talks about it in Ephesians, he talks about it as we all start off like unable to process like milk. We were all reliant on milk, and we were all like tossed upon like every idea because everything seemed appealing. But we are told to grow constantly in Christ towards understanding, towards maturity, and towards solid food.
Yeah, so Charlotte, usually students in high school aren't thinking about parenting, let alone writing their senior thesis on it. So what like gave you a passion to want to dive so deeply into a topic like this?
So I would say the reason why I felt so passionate about this is because I played volleyball throughout the second half of my high school years, and throughout that I could see, well, the purpose of this is to create leaders. The purpose of this is to create strength, and the purpose of this is to grow as a person and be able to handle trials, issues, conflicts with other people, conflicts with yourself. And in that I was able to see, well, what should the standard then be for a child? And I then kept thinking, like, I'm expecting this person over here to act in this way. Well, why am I saying that? Because I know that they should be growing in maturity. And I have expectations because God has expectations. And that's kind of why I came here originally. I was going to talk about the importance of sports as it brings children to maturity and dealing with issues. But then I wanted to focus on why are a bunch of children now lacking maturity? That's kind of the connection. I first wanted to focus on the importance of sports. That then brought over to, well, why is there a lack?
Yeah, on that note of maturity, you said that maturity is like the most important goal for a parent to try to see in their kid, because it informs the rest of their life. The opposite, right, is the immaturity. What kinds of adults do you think that immature children, because here you're talking about children, but we're thinking about them as adults. What kind of adults would you say that immature children grow into, and why should we be so concerned with the issue of immature children?
So my personal argument is that they never stop truly being children. Like, I have worked with many people over the years, both at my own work job, like workplace, and like with people I run across, like whether at church or other places, and I find that they are still children. They are still unable to have opinions of their own. They're still unable to find wisdom and pick the right things. Even when they do wrong, they can't point to the right decision. And that's the entire point of wisdom, is being able to point to the right decision even when you're wrong. And so they never stop being children, and whether that's they still rely on their parents for any decision, opinion, or like idea they have. They rely on their friends for these ideas, decisions, and opinions, or they have complete reliance on their identity, like as a worker, to dictate that to them, as they cannot think for themselves.
In your paper, well, first, how would you define, just for us, an over-controlling parent, and how did you determine that definition?
So the way I defined an over-controlling parent was a parent whose rules and regulations were not for the goal of maturity and letting go of the child, but complete constraint for protection and for control. Meaning they view the role of parent to prevent any issues and to lead them into perfection, even if that means that the child does not know how to do it themselves and doesn't know how to fall and get back up, doesn't know how to walk towards the right area and doesn't know how to do those things. They take the child and go, I know the right way for you. You will follow what I say. And the child learns to comply to that because they don't know any other way. And so the child is now being dragged along by the parent who claims they know the best thing for their life, when that's clearly not right because the child needs to learn that for themselves.
And then to build off of that, in your paper, you also mentioned two types of over-controlling parents. You mentioned the two categories, like the social aspect category and the time aspect category. So how did you differentiate that general category of over-controlling parents into the social aspect and the time aspect?
So when breaking down the idea of over-control, it obviously shows in many different ways, because I see it in two ways. That there's the over-control socially, as you said, meaning they fear the people in society. They fear that their child might be tainted, might be attacked, might be hurt, and so they completely constrain them from any injury that they might withstand. That is fear of society for that. And then the second one, with the time one, is fear of failure, kind of, in that my child will not be less than. I have a fear that they will not amount to greatness, and so I must guide them directly towards what I think is greatness. And so that's kind of the split ideas of it, is either you're fearing the world and controlling them, or you're fearing failure and you're controlling them.
You talk about totalitarian parents controlling how a child spends their time and energy. Should a parent's openness to their child's desires extend to church engagement as well?
So that's another thing that I made sure to specify, is that as a parent, it is your job to have standards for them. It is not wrong to have standards for your child. Whether that is, I want my child to be in a sport. That's fine. I want my child to go to church. You are raising them according to your values. I want my child to practice 4 hours a day on this instrument. Well, that's not entirely true. And so it's basically when your values are not at risk, your religious values in that, and you are teaching them to enjoy their life, whether that's through sports, music, any sort of extracurricular, socially. But you should not, you are still the parent and you are supposed to guide them still, but you should not be dragging them to through life to things that they clearly don't want to do, like sports. But there are non-negotiables, such as religion, such as family aspects of you need to be doing this for our family, and so on and so forth.
Switching gears a little bit, based on your argument in your thesis about David accepting guidance from his peers, would you say that it's impossible for peers to offer wisdom to each other, or can wisdom only come from those older than you?
David, do you mean the Solomon? Yeah, I was like, wait a second. So that was mainly the idea of they were accepting with that. Earlier in that section of verses, it says a bunch of the older counselors were trying to give him advice, and he rejected that for newer ideas. He was rejecting tried and true counsel that was biblical because it was from his father and his grandfather, but rather he was rejecting it for newer ideas that were people that he grew up with, and so he was comfortable with it, and that's why he accepted it. Not because it was true, in which it can be, but because he accepted it because it was comfortable. And so when truth and comfort conflict, that's when you should never accept it.
Yeah, Charlotte, in your paper you talked a lot about children looking to their parents as models and not just doing what they say, but often replicating what they see them do. Based on what you researched and what you saw, what do you think that parents should commit themselves to in order to ensure their own maturity so that they have something for their children to model after?
So I think a really necessary thing is to, of course, be firm in your own faith. If you are unable to stand on your own faith, how are you going to encourage your child there in it? But the main thing is understanding God's purpose of parenting and God's pattern of parenting, how he does it, how he grows us, and that he does not restrict conflict, he does not restrict issues, and how he encourages and guides us through discipline instead of punishment, how he encourages us through love and dignity.
Yeah, on a bit of a personal note, you're thinking a lot about parenting and this whole thing. It has to make you think a little bit about the future in some sense. What do you think is the biggest takeaway, the one thing that you feel really passionate about that you would love to instill as a parent one day?
So one of the verses I took from, I think it was in Deuteronomy, it was when the commandments were being given to the Jewish people, and in it says you must teach your children when you walk, when you lie down, when you eat, when you pass by, when you're sitting down, in everything that you do, no matter where you are meant to be teaching your child the laws of God. You are meant to be echoing that continuously to them, and there should be nothing left within your life that does not bring them closer to Christ. I think that would be the main thing, that your life is meant to completely reflect God so that it's easier for them to come to God. And so I would say just the idea of you, in everything that you give them, in everything that you teach them, in everything that you show them, it should bring them to biblical truths, biblical understanding, and an open heart towards God.
I love how your paper points to God as the perfect parent and how you weave his word all throughout your argument. How do you think this focus shaped your research and your conclusions?
Yeah, so one of my biggest debates was whether I should do statistics on this is statistically what we view as 89% of children nowadays are considered immature, and that's dropped since 1970 something. I didn't think that was the best way to view this argument. This is clearly a moral and spiritual argument, as this specifically connects to the idea of raising people in Christ and bringing them to the faith. And so I viewed the Bible as the highest authority for this, because I knew that this is a truth that the world will differ from. I knew that this was a truth that statistics wouldn't give me a biblical view on, and that the world was going to argue against me for this, because this is a clearly godly idea of parenting. And so I put God as the highest authority and the highest standard, because that is how he connects to us. So why wouldn't I use it as that?
What are some ways that your parents exhibited a godly standard of parenting growing up?
So I would say one of my favorite things that my parents always said to us was, they used an analogy of, they will give us a rope, and that might be I get to stay out an extra later each night, or I can go hang out with friends, and I can either use that rope maturely and climb further up and gain more respect, more wisdom, more understanding, or I can hang myself with that rope, and I can lose that standard, and I can lose respect, and I can lose maturity in that. So whenever my parents would let me do something that was beyond what was normal, I get to stay out till whatever, it's just simple things like that, they'd say, I'm giving you a rope. Know that, please understand that. And I think that was a really interesting idea, and I've of course hung myself many times. But I think it's just continuing in that idea of, when my parents are giving me decisions, they are asking for me to make the mature decision. I might not always make it, but I should learn how to recognize, make the wise decision, make the true decision. And I would say another thing that they had for us is, before dinner or something, they would go around the table and they would have us repeat family values. No one could eat dinner until we repeated these family values. We've since stopped doing this because we all know them. But for children, no one could eat their dinner until we repeated that you must love God, you must have family first, you must work with excellence, You must show kindness and truthfulness towards other people, and you must be generous with your time and your money. Now, I would say that like kind of drill that there are like standards for me. That like as a child, 6 years old, waiting to eat dinner, there are standards for me when I go out into the world. And that I'm not supposed to be like, I'm 6 years old, but like I'm supposed to rise and supposed to mature.
So help me out as a new parent, Charlotte. You use the example of these gardeners, right? So you have, obviously the good gardener is putting their plant out sometimes and bringing it in sometimes. But that implies that my son, he's a human being, not a plant, I have to leave him outside at times, theoretically, hypothetically, but to endure something hard that I know is coming. So I know something is hard is coming, but I have to leave him outside anyway. What truths does a parent have to hold on to withstand something like that? Like, I'm going to watch hardship come to my child. How do I allow that to happen?
That is a big, big question that like whenever I talk to someone is like, how much should you let your child endure outside, and how am I supposed to do this? So I would say one of the main truths that a parent should hold on to is the idea of God is using everything for his kingdom. God is using everything to build you up. There is no thing in your life that is not supposed to guide you towards maturity. No matter what it is, even as stupid as, like, I know this is a classic example, but someone cut you off in traffic. That is the most classic example, but everything is meant to guide you towards this maturity, towards this understanding, and every small challenge is helping guide you towards being a greater person in Christ.
All right, no further questions. Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you, judges.
All right, next up is Joel Emmons, but we have 5-minute breaks, so feel free to get up, walk around, and reset for the next.
Pleasure being a judge with you.
that. Hello?
I might put it in the center because that way it's, yeah.
Like that.
There, and you stick that in your pocket. And you're good. All right. The Lord your God is with you. He's got this.
Yep. What? It's a microphone. What?
That was a $20 shirt. I'm really proud of you.
Thank you.
God bless you, Joel. We could put this like up.
It doesn't. No, she wanted it right here.
No, I know. I'm saying the wire.
It's fine.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd find your seats, Joel Emmons is up next.
Yep. All right.
All right, so just like last time, Joel will have 5 minutes to present an abstract on his 20-page paper, after which Brian Pruitt, Peter Coleman, and Hannah Learned will ask 20 minutes worth of questions to him. So Joel, whenever you're ready.
Is it possible for a person to be able to determine what the morally right decision is, what the ethical choice is when faced with adversity? This is a question that can only be answered by the dichotomy of values between what God the Father himself puts value towards and what an overwhelming majority of our secular society puts significance on. On one side, you have one of the highest virtues of the Christian religion, which is humility. On the other side, you have individualism, which is a manifestation of human nature in the physical world and our pursuit of our own desires. Humility itself undermines all of the aspects and qualities that make up and pertain to the individualist mindset. But to see this, first we need to understand what these terms mean and what the ramifications are for them in the real world. To start things off, individualism is the ideology claiming that every single person has inherent desires, has these inherent wants for life, and that a person is compelled to act upon in every decision of their life and choice in their life to pursue these desires, their wants, to exercise their will to do what it is they desire throughout the course of their life. Now, this is an ideology that is very present in many different cultures, societies, and nations throughout the course of human history. One of the more recent examples of this is the rise of the transgenderism movement. Transgenderism claims that a person can identify in any manner they wish that they feel best represents who they are on the inside, their personal character. Individualism is the principle that is used when for this idea, and it has been used throughout the course of many different societies. One of the best examples being the United States of America. The United States was built off of the individualist mindset. The founding fathers of the United States decided that they wanted individual freedom from the English monarchy. This is something that they wanted. There are some issues that individualism brings, though, because it refuses to give any kind of moral foundation or principle when it comes to making decisions for life. Specifically because every single person is going to disagree, every person is going to conflict with one another, and individualism, it just supports that. It doesn't give any kind of explanation or principle that of which we can use to have unity. Now, the solution to this comes in our understanding of what wisdom is, which is ironic because from the secular viewpoint, the individualist mindset is often conflated with the quality of having wisdom, seeing as both lead to the idealized life that so many of us are trying to achieve. Now, wisdom is the understanding of wisdom has been an arduous journey for theologians, philosophers, and scholars throughout the course of history. But wisdom can be defined as the ability to apply good ethical reasoning towards decisions and choices. But to do this, the only way that a person can realize wisdom is to understand the moral standard, which only comes from God. So a person must have faith to be able to do that. But to realize wisdom, there is one step that must be taken to take place, the domino effect that leads to this realization, and that would be humility. Humility is itself the ability to accept one's own personal faults and realize one's own sinful nature. This is something that is required in the pursuit of realizing what wisdom is. And this is why humility is a direct conflicting force to individualism. Because of the fact that humility is about seeing one's own wrongdoings throughout the course of their life, it is entirely opposing the viewpoint that I should, the individualist mindset, that I should make every decision supporting myself and only what I desire. There is not a world in which a person can pursue both of the ideals of humility and individualism. While they are not complete opposites, they are absolutely conflicting forces. And humility is itself the antithesis of the individualist. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. I would love to hear, what was your process in selecting this as your thesis topic?
Oh boy, this is a long one. So by the end of the first semester of Challenge 4, I had a clear present thesis that I wanted to do, and that was the act of humility is the first step in realizing wisdom. That was my original thesis, and that was the thing that I wanted to pursue and probably make a senior thesis about, something that reflected the things that I'm interested in life, and that's what it was. But at the beginning of semester 2, I started doing an English Composition 2 class through Southeastern University, which is a college CC+, which is a college program that I've been doing since Challenge 2. In English Composition 2, my first assignment was just stating the idea and my process for getting my idea for the senior thesis. And when I did, my teacher responded, "This is an interesting starting point, but is not a sustainable topic." And so I had to go into another about 6 weeks worth of research to try to build up and make more ideas that are real world applicable, which is what she wanted. She wanted more something along the lines of a policy debate, something like the death penalty. Should we abolish it or should we not? Where there are two clear standpoints. That's the kind of topic that she wanted. And throughout this process, I just went over, okay, I want to still talk about these things, but I need it in contrast to something else, some kind of an issue. So when I was researching what are the many different communities and problems that face our world today, the one thing that I was able to find at the commonality was individualism. And so it wasn't until probably about 3 weeks before I had to submit the senior thesis that I actually had a grounded topic, which led me to this. Because I compared and contrasted individualism to the topics that I already had and found that there's a complete opposition between humility and individualism. This was a really long process and a bit frustrating at times, but I do appreciate the feedback that I was given from my peers and from my professor, because it gave me the opportunity to research and look into so many different ideas that pertain to the world we live in.
Thank you, Joel. Do you know, at this rate, we're going to be running out of questions. But I'd like to know, try to be as specific as you can, what particular concern, personal concern, prompted you to address that issue of individualistic mindset in our current society? What inspired you or what compelled you to pursue this, to really look deeply into this issue?
Like I said, when I was researching, the common point that I found was individualism. The reason I chose it as a topic is because of how applicable it is in every single area of life. So many people I see in the real world decide, I'm only going to do what's right for me, and consequences I don't care for. I don't care what happens, I don't care who I hurt, or maybe I do the right thing, or maybe I do what is good in the eyes of others. But no matter what, I'm always going to pursue my own interests, which I saw how much of a contrast it is to the concept of humility, and that's why I wanted to go into the topic. Humility is one of the main principles I've tried to live my life, to adopt in my life, and try to live through my actions and choices. So that's the counterpoint. That's why I wanted to choose it, because I saw here's a common point, here is an area where I can create a dichotomy, and that's why I wanted to do this as a topic.
You mentioned again the dichotomy. You addressed that also in your abstract. You refer to, and I'll quote, the dichotomy of values between the majority of our society and the values of God the Father himself. My question would be, for a little more clarification, what do you believe accounts for this dichotomy of values specifically?
The reason for the existence of this dichotomy is if the entirety of our world just subscribed to one manner of principles and ideals, this being what God values, then there'd be no problem. But since the fall, since the first sin was committed in the Garden of Eden, there was a separation between what God sees as virtuous and righteous and what we see as personally acceptable for ourselves, as what we see as good. Since that time, there has been this major separation between what it is that we think is good and what God knows is absolutely good.
Thank you, Joel.
I was intrigued with the contrast that you've made here. The theme of individualism is so live today in political culture and post-liberalism, things like that. And then the discussion of humility as the bedrock Christian virtue is historically contrasted with pride. So it strikes me that you probably could have gone down a lot of different roads in your research, whether it's contemporary politics or classic virtue theology. So what were the most helpful resources to you in the journey, and where did you find yourself surprised along the way?
Most helpful resources, I wanted to create a paper that is talking about these big abstract concepts and see the knowledge, use the knowledge and wisdom that's been provided through the years from the greatest minds, from Solomon, from Paul, from Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, Socrates, Plato. Those have been by far my most helpful when it comes to coming to as close a definition as I can to both humility and wisdom, especially since one of the things I noticed is the Bible doesn't give a clear definition of wisdom, not explicitly. It gives, I read throughout the book of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, the books of wisdom themselves, don't really give clear definitions. They give, okay, wisdom leads to this. This is what a wise man looks like, but didn't give a clear definition. So I would say these great philosophers are the ones that were most helpful when it comes to narrowing things down. And the dictionary I used, which it was Webster's dictionary, because that gives a perspective of what the world we live in today views these kinds of topics. What was the second portion of your question?
Thinking about surprises in your research, where did you find yourself surprised along the way?
Again, just the applicability that individualism has in every single portion of life. So many of us want to pursue these greedy and selfish desires that we have that are inherent to our human nature. And I see it in so many areas, in politics, in religious battles, and just me talking with my friends, for crying out loud. It's so applicable in every single day. I see a form of someone adopting the individualist mindset in some way, shape, or form.
And with that, I wonder about the theme of, in Christian virtue and vice, the classic contrast is between humility and pride. As you're thinking about contemporary versions of individualism that you see in our culture, how does the classic Christian discussion of pride feed our understanding of the dangers of individualism?
That's one of the things I wanted to make clear, was that humility is not the absolute opposite of individualism. That would be something more along the lines of absolute altruism, something that is purely and utterly selfless. Humility is the exact opposite of pride. But I found this connection between these other 2 points that I think intersect between the 2 dichotomies. I think there is a lot of important information and knowledge that can be learned from the dichotomy of pride and humility. I know that C.S. Lewis states that pride is the ultimate sin, by which every other choice and fault of human nature derives from. is pride. That's what led to the decision made by Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and I think that's important. But I also think that searching into what are the other types of motivations that lead people towards these decisions, I wanted to look into those, because enough people have talked about pride.
In your paper, you recognized this idea of morality and the standard of morality with the foundation being rooted in God's word and what we find. So I'm curious, how would you approach this conversation about individualism with somebody who may not recognize that as the same foundation that defines what morality is?
Yes. Well, one of the pieces of feedback I got from my professor for college was try to take into account different viewpoints to this issue, which is difficult when the entirety of my argument is based off Christianity. There is one implicit assumption that I make that is not based off Christian virtues, and that is the idea that unity among people is something to be valued. That's something that I incorporated into my essay, and that's how I would handle the conversation. Individualism leads to a divide in people and nations, and unity is something that we should value because of this reason, this reason, this reason. That's how I'd approach a conversation with someone who isn't Christian, who doesn't see it from the same viewpoint that I do. This is creating a problem, and if nothing else, unity is something that can help us solve that problem.
Thank you, Joel. You're no doubt familiar with the term heuristic learning, namely the kind of learning which benefits from the process or discovery or active engagement with a topic. And you have it's beyond clear that you have actively engaged with this topic, with this issue. In retrospect, in what way, if any, did your research become more difficult or demanding? Were there glitches? Were there obstacles?
I mean, I just think to the song, Writing Like You're Running Out of Time, the line from Hamilton, just because I started running out of time when it comes to researching, trying to find a specific topic before all my senior thesis stuff was due. Because, like I said, I didn't have a grounded topic until week 3. 3 weeks before was due, and didn't have the full senior thesis written until about 2 days before it was due. And even then I made like a few slight edits, but that's just like grammar and stuff. Yeah, the degree to which I had to research was a bit more than I expected, and so I didn't necessarily plan that out. But at the same time, that's because I needed to change what it is that my entire topic was about from the feedback I got from my professors. So for me, it was kind of just time management. In terms of the difficulty of understanding the topics themselves, I would say just coming up with objections. How many ramifications can I find of, okay, objection 1 to my thesis, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How many of them can I address in this paper, and how many of them can I find, period? So being able to try to research every single little portion of every topic that I went over in my paper, that was the difficult part.
Thank you very much. Would you be willing to share with us what may be the most compelling or impactful insight you gained from your research and writing?
For me, it was just supporting things that I had suspected but not understand the entirety of, specifically having to do with humility. Humility is the beginning of the path that leads to the righteous. It's the beginning of the path that leads to having absolute faith. At least that's the arguments that I've placed in my essay, and it's what I personally believe. Humility is one of the most important aspects of life, and going back to that dichotomy of humility is the opposite of pride. If pride is the very first sin, then humility is the first way that we can attempt to overcome that pride, overcome that sin.
Excellent. Thank you, Joel.
So sometimes when you do these large projects, you get to the end of it, and it's like, okay, now I'm ready to actually start studying it. So if you think about this as springboard, this paper is springboard, if you were to continue on with this, what would you want to dive into next, or how would you want to extend your learning on this?
Question. I haven't thought about that one. Being able to add more objections, like I said, to be able to just thoroughly prove this as much as I can. I would also be interested to see how many instances I can find the individualist mindset throughout the course of human history, and find how, because like in my paper I stated more recent things, transgenderism movement, abortion, the LGBTQ as a whole, like those, I mentioned those types of things as examples of people adopting the individualist mindset and what comes because of that. I'm curious to see what more things would come when I research the history of humans as a whole. How many different areas can I find this to further prove my points?
Yeah, that's good. What do you, and so where do you feel like, if you think about the paper as it stands, what's the weak link? Where do you feel like this is the place where I'm most exposed, the post I really needed to, if I had to do it again, I would want to dive into this piece or strengthen this piece of it?
The arguments took a long time to be able to make the connection, because wisdom is my connection between humility and individualism. Definitely expanding more on humility and the connections between the 2 points, because I outlined point 1 here. This is the problem. Solution, point here. And my bridge for that is wisdom. I would say putting more emphasis on showing the misunderstanding of the majority of our society on what wisdom is, and showing how that specifically relates to the issues caused by individualism.
So if you think about there are certainly cultural contexts that really have more of a collectivist value rather than an individualist value. What, as you think about some of those cultures that you've studied through CC, what wisdom can you gain from the value of humility as it applies to their context that maybe are less influenced by individualism than the American West or the Western culture?
You're asking what humility can be found?
Yeah. What's the wisdom of humility in a collectivist context?
Okay. Interesting. Because I would say wisdom itself cannot be found in purely just a collectivist society, because again, wisdom comes as a gift from God that we have to realize. In terms of what humility can be found, I know in my paper I outlined the topic of kenosis, which is a Greek term talking about the idea of emptying oneself in the pursuit of becoming greater. This is one of the things that I outlined because it's something that Paul specifically talks about in the book of Philippians when he's trying to explain, okay, here's the humility of Christ, and this is why you should try to reflect it in your own life. This is why he is compelling. I would say that we can stumble across things by accident once in a while, and I would say that's one instance where collectivist societies can, by chance, come across the values pertaining to Christianity, but I don't think there's too much specific significance that can come from it without the actual faith itself. I could completely understand someone's topic or a concept pertaining to someone else's belief system, but if I don't believe it, what significance does it have on my day-to-day life?
That you mentioned a couple of objections that you weren't able to get into specifically. What would be like the first one that you would want to tackle? And then second question with that, were there any that you would be more hesitant to tackle as you feel like they would challenge your argument as it is right now?
All right. So I made the connection that the virtue and human quality that individualism most connects to is selfishness or greed. And then I make the jump that selfishness and greed is a part of sinful human nature. So I would say one of the objections could be, does individualism necessarily directly correlate with sin or human nature? I think that's something that I'd want to address, and something that I don't have the evidence to further prove that beyond what I wrote in the essay, but that's something that I would want to look into more.
Here's a little bit of a long question. I would expect a short answer. All right? You've clearly stated and supported the firm conviction that the Christian Bible is the ultimate, and I quote, standard for morality. We certainly agree. You've also stated that our society has failed to place emphasis on moral qualities that are tied to what wisdom truly means. You've likely heard the saying, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Using that analogy, tell me, if wisdom were the chicken and morality the egg, which would come first?
I defined wisdom specifically as the ability to apply good ethical reasoning towards situations and choices. Ethical reasoning is itself the application of morality to the real world. And good ethical reasoning is the ability to see what is the right decision in this. And morality itself can only come from God. So first comes morality, because with that, you need that first to establish the foundation by which wisdom comes from, which is ethics. So definitely morality comes first. Wisdom is a byproduct of it.
In 1 Peter 3, the apostle quotes the following text from Proverbs 3:34. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. We've spoken of this together. In what ways does this text of Scripture help us to better understand the relationship between wisdom and humility?
Again, it's going back to what I said about wisdom is a gift from God. Similar to how when Jesus Christ came and died for our sins, he offered us redemption. He offered us redemption through his grace. But it's a gift that we have to realize. We have to have faith in order to receive that gift, and that is how we realize what it is. In a similar way, wisdom is another gift from God. But to achieve any semblance of wisdom, we must first have to realize what it is, where it comes from, and what steps are necessary to take into action what that is.
You did it. Congratulations.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you all for coming to Joel Emmons'
Thank you so
defense. Next up is Mackenzie Newland, and you'll have a 5-minute break, so feel free to stand up and walk around.
Dang it, I'm in shock, dang it.
You're done, you're free. You're free,
Oh.
Beautiful. Well done.
I'm doing wonderful. Are you up for Mackenzie?
Uh-huh.
Okay, fantastic. Where do you want to sit?
Well, I'll keep
Okay.
my spot if that's all
Okay,
right.
that's fine with me.
I'll
Yep.
put anywhere, but if I'm farthest from the iPad, I don't have to do time sheet.
Yes, yes. I'll take the middle for that reason.
See? There you go.
Perfect.
Strategy here. Hello.
Hi. All right, which one of you is the physical therapist?
Not I. Sounds good.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
So once they're done with the abstract, you'll hit start, and that'll be your 20-minute timer.
Wait, what did you say? The abstract?
For,
Say that again?
after
I
they
just zoned
finish,
out.
I know, I saw. after Mackenzie finishes her abstract,
Got it. Then
you'll hit start,
got it.
and you'll have 20 minutes.
All right, sounds good.
And so you guys will watch for like 19 minutes after the
Yes.
final question.
Okay.
Hi, nice to have you here. Thank you so much.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, of course.
This is Brian, if you've not met him, and this is
Yeah.
Steve.
Pleasure.
You're the physical therapist.
No, I'm not. I'm a dietitian.
Dietitian.
Nice.
Okay.
Nice.
She said there was going to be a physical therapist on
Is
her
that
panel.
supposed to be
So.
My
Sponsor?
boyfriend was supposed to do it.
Oh,
He's
okay.
in the process of studying
Yes, understood.
at a session.
Yes, yes. No, that's okay. I was like, all right. My technical questions, I may
That's right.
defer, but I have a long, long list of questions, and I'm ready to go.
I do, but yeah.
We'll save the nutrition question
Yeah.
for you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to begin. So if you all would grab a seat, this is Mackenzie's defense. All right, so this is Mackenzie's defense. She will have 5 minutes to present an abstract on her 20-page paper. And then the judges, Brian Pruitt and Paula DiDiego and Steve Sabo, will ask 20 minutes worth of questions. So Mackenzie, whenever you're ready.
Integrated athletic recovery is just as important as training in performance and injury prevention. Recovery is not just rest. It is a complex process that includes physical, nutritional, and psychological processes, as well as active and passive recovery, mobility work, foam rolling, hydrotherapy, massage therapy, hydration, nutrition, and sleep. In my research, I discovered that training causes high amounts of stress in the body, and without enough time to recover, that stress can lead to overtraining, fatigue, decreased performance, and a higher risk of injury. I also discovered that not only does a person need to be physically recovered, but also mentally recovered. There are many different types of recovery strategies. I explored the effectiveness of active recovery compared to passive recovery, the role of mobility in improving flexibility, and which reduces the risk of injury, and the benefits of techniques like massage and foam rolling in reducing muscle soreness and improving circulation. Although some may argue that recovery is not as important as training, and training is more important than recovery, my thesis clearly demonstrates that without enough time to recover, training eventually becomes less effective. Another highly important thing for athletes is the return to sport protocols, which emphasizes the need for athletes to be both mentally and physically prepared in order to reduce the risk of injury.
Well done, Mackenzie. You have some great points here, and one of the things I would like to ask of you is, could you just elaborate on passive versus active recovery?
Yeah, active recovery is like a recovery strategy that's mostly doing things like massage therapy or hydrotherapy, stretching, while passive recovery is more like relaxing and resting and sleeping.
One of the other points that you made, and I know is of particular interest in your paper, is you include not just the physical but the psychological recovery in your argument. And I was hoping you could expand on that a bit for us.
Yeah, so when an athlete is injured and once they're healed and they're thinking about returning to the sport, they have to go through multiple different types of tests to see if they are qualified or ready to actually return to the sport. So say an athlete had an ACL tear. Some of the physical tests might be hopping on one leg to see how that knee's like reacting to the jumping. But another thing that they have to do is take some mental tests to make sure that they're mentally healthy, because these mental tests are testing to see if they have this fear called kinesiophobia, which is the fear of movement. And a lot of athletes who have been injured have that fear because they're scared that they're going to get re-injured when they return to their sport. And this actually increases their likelihood of being injured a second time when they go back to their sport 13 times more likely than athletes who do not have kinesiophobia.
Excellent, thank you. Another thing that your paper really focuses on is the holistic approach in recovery. And so what does that mean in practical terms?
Yeah, so holistic recovery is more of a natural way of recovering instead of going to like the doctors and getting prescribed a bunch of medicines to help you or having a bunch of like procedures you need to go through. It's more of a natural way to heal your body back to what it once was.
Nice job, Mackenzie. You did a really nice job building like a multifaceted approach to integrating athletic recovery into practical steps. I was wondering, as you were researching, like what initially drew you to the topic of athletic recovery, and how did your understanding of it, as you did more research, and how did your understanding of it evolve throughout your research?
The reason why I chose the topic was because I am planning on going to college to be for exercise science, so be like a physical therapist or an occupational therapist or something like that. But before I started researching, I didn't really ever know like what actual athletic recovery was. I kind of just pictured like what you see in the movies of like people recovering. But as I began to research, I realized that it's mostly a combination of like a bunch of different things like hydrotherapy and like foam rolling and massage and like strengthening the muscles again, and also a really big mental aspect as well.
You say that in your paper that integrated athletic recovery is just as important as athletic training. How would you define or measure the importance for this comparison?
So I would say that integrated athletic recovery is just as important, because if an athlete is just constantly training, which is important too, but if they're just training and training and training, eventually that builds up to like an overtraining, which causes stress on the body, and it can cause them to be mentally fatigued, and it can decrease their performance because they aren't being able to make decisions as quick as they would if they were fully there. And so I would say that they need time to recover in order to have a good performance.
And you included so many good recovery strategies. I was wondering, how did you decide which ones were essential to your argument, and maybe if there were some ones you didn't choose to include, and why?
I kind of like mentioned like just a whole list of them like very briefly in my paper, but as I was reading through all like the articles, I picked the topmost ones that were talked about in like basically all of them and made those like the main ones, and the ones that like I had to find like just like a specific source that was talking about it on it and wasn't really in others, I focused on like a little less.
I spent years as a youth sports coach, and so one of the things that I've wrestled with is my concerns about the culture of early specialization in athletics. And I noticed you made a reference to that in the paper. So as you've thought about athletic recovery, how does that help inform the world in which kids are specializing and maybe over-specializing in sports way too young and overtraining all year long on these things?
Mm-hmm. So when kids are like specializing in sports way too young, they are only working on like certain muscles or like certain like repetitive movements. And so I think if an athlete is specializing in a sport at a very young age, they need to be exercising the whole body and strengthening the whole body instead of just to the specific sport, so that way there's no imbalances and they can be a better athlete that way.
That's good. Do you feel like, as you looked at the research, is it from the exercise science community, is it kind of just a general consensus about best practices, or did you find there's a back and forth that you're having to kind of navigate, and some people want a different kind of value or just value something differently in this world?
Most people
would say that it needs to be an integrated approach, but those who do not know as much about it would say that they only need to really like rest and like sleep, and but those who like study it, I would say most of them say that it needs to be an integrated approach.
So where do you feel like as you want to take this to the next level then? Like where do you want to dig further or research further if you're wanting to pursue this on down the road?
I would like to understand more of how like the muscles and like the body actually works instead of how each recovery strategy affects the body. Like understand that more and go into more in depth of like what it truly actually does.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about just recovery. Why do you think that recovery is often underestimated compared to training?
I would say that it's because people think that all they need to do is train to become a better athlete and just like constantly work on like the movements and like the strategies instead of actually giving their body time to recover, which will help them in the long run improve those movements and like strengthen their body.
Okay, thank you. So what inspired you to choose this topic?
I chose this topic because I find how the body works is like so fascinating, and especially like because I'm going to college to be like a physical therapist or something like that, I thought it'd be a really cool to get like a sneak peek of what I'm going to be learning about when I go to college, and also it would help me understand more when I go as well.
That's wise, very wise. What was something that you found very challenging as far as writing your thesis, and how did you overcome that?
The hardest part for me was probably time management. I didn't realize how much time I was actually going to need to spend researching. And then also the writing part, because it wasn't like I could just write a bunch of things like the others could. I had to like go back to the articles, find like what I wanted to say, make sure I was like actually saying the right thing. It was like it was a lot more scientific and like factual instead of just writing my
Yes, yeah. You have a lot of great details in your paper. So how do you feel this shaped your faith, whether it's this process or the topic itself?
I feel like it just like brought me closer to God because of like managing like the stress of like not having like the paper written as much as I wanted it to at certain points, and also just seeing like how the body works and how like it's like crazy and super intricate, and like we couldn't have just like come into existence. There had to be like a God who made us because our bodies are just so intricate and complex.
A good question. I'm going to build off of that question as well. How would you integrate your faith and beliefs into your future practice one day?
Maybe by like showing them how they like the patients like how their body works, and like kind of like getting them to see that how like it's more than just like that specific part that needs to be healed. It's like their whole body, and just like showing them that their like body is more intricate than just like the specific parts.
That's really good. Briefly, you mentioned how not everyone, as far as athletes, have access to these trainers and these recovery tools. So how would your model be affected by this, and how would you adapt it?
it can be affected, but in certain ways, like they might not be able to go see a massage therapist or like a physical therapist and stuff like that. But I think that there's like a lot of great ways that they can like look things up to see and know like if they have knee problems, that might be because they have to strengthen like their hips or their glutes. So they can like look up ways to strengthen those, and also maybe also just focusing on like the other recovery aspects like hydrotherapy or stretching or foam rolling, like things that they can do at home.
Yeah, time could also be a resource that's affected by this. So I was wondering, as far as if you could only implement 3 that that you discuss in your paper, which would you prioritize and why?
Well, I think the most important one would be the one that has shown the most is rest, because it doesn't just affect your body, it also affects the mental health, which was a big role in it. Another one would be maybe the stretching for like the mobility work, and then maybe strengthening the core other muscles and that affect the body.
So I too was impressed with your ability to manage a lot of the trees, a lot of the details, the technical information here. So I think it can be challenging in writing a paper like this to, don't lose the forest for the trees. You're keeping the big picture in mind. So what did you find most challenging in the trees or in the weeds of the details here? What did you find most challenging there? What was the big picture that helped sustain you as you navigated those?
One of the hardest parts was just like kind of like I wanted to talk about so many things, and the hard part was like getting it to like flow into each other and like getting it to be ordered a proper way, like with all the different techniques. But I feel like having like the bigger picture being like coming back to saying, oh, it needs to be integrated at the end of each paragraph was very helpful.
Yeah, and I'm just curious, kind of building off the previous question, that for those of us that are weekend warriors that really don't have a future with the Olympics or in professional sports, how would you advise us, the normals, about how to navigate some of the wisdom of this work in our athletic life?
Like, do you mean like with like recovering
Yeah.
and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say like it also like comes into like daily stuff too. Like even like just say like you like when you work out, like it could come into play with, oh, say you're only training arms, like that could like cause like your arms to like eventually like pull a muscle or like tear something. And so giving like your like time for your arms to recover, maybe like doing like a different muscle group, and then like or giving yourself time to rest in between, and yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. What do you hope that people learn from hearing you present this research today?
That they're more intricate than like we feel like than we think we are, like, 'cause it's, as I said before, it's more than just the specific muscle groups, it's our whole bodies matter. So like something you do to like your knee would affect like your hip, or something you do to your arm could affect like your elbow or stuff like that. So just understanding that our bodies are all like connected, and everything is important in your body.
Yes. So I know in your paper you lay out a lot of details about agility and endurance and strength and skill, and you talk a lot about some of the types or specific, passive versus active recovery techniques that people could use. One of the things I think I haven't heard you mention yet, so I want to make sure you highlight, because it is such an important thing, and you mentioned in your paper, how do nutrition and hydration contribute to recovery from a physiological standpoint?
Yeah, so the food that we eat has a really big impact on us, and you need to be putting into your body like healthier foods instead of just like junk food, because like after people eat a bunch of junk food, everyone like you feel like gross or you feel tired, but after you eat like a healthy meal, you feel like good and you feel energized. And another thing that's really important is like protein, especially for building muscles, because you can't build muscles without eating protein. So that is a really big part of it.
What about the hydration component?
Yeah, hydration is also important because your body needs like the liquid, and so it helps like your mental state, and it helps with like rejuvenizing, and it helps you be more aware and like cognitive ability.
So through all of your research and the journey that you went on through having to write and synthesize a thesis and come up with an argument to the counter argument about athletic training being more important, how has this changed your thinking about the stewardship for our own bodies and physical health?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I can't, well, not the whole thing, but I will repeat the question. So when you've gone through this project, how has that influenced the way you think about how we should be stewarding our bodies? And you can answer that in a faith component as well as just a physical component, but how has that influenced the way you think about how we should steward our own bodies for physical as well as mental health?
Yeah, I feel like it just shows that we need to be treating our bodies in a way that honors God by like actually taking care of ourselves and actually paying attention to what we do, because it affects us. And so I would say we need to like just watch like what we eat, what we put into our heads, like what we do, because it affects like everything.
We have no further questions. Well done, Mackenzie.
All right, so that was Mackenzie's defense. Last but not least will be Oriana in 5 minutes.
No, I just felt done.
Are you like sweating?
Finished.
How do you feel?
Good.
Oh, you gotta take this
I am
off.
gonna take the shirt.
You
Yeah.
did a great job.
Thank you.
Well done. How do you feel? Yeah? Are you happy with how that went?
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad. You should be. All right. Yep. And then,
I'll connect it to my.
yeah, perfect. Let me grab this chair.
Yeah. Hey, hello. Are you my other judge?
Yes, who else is?
Miss Pruitt and I don't know who I'm trying to remember. Oh, Stephanie Geisler. Yeah. Hey. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna go say hi to my dad real quick. Excuse me. How about? That's right there. Yeah. من صفقة أنا نتيلي هل من 12 o'clock. Yeah.
You ready? You good? Everything ready?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nayla.
We're gonna talk and talk and talk. I know Lewis. I
Yeah, my teacher. Hi. This is my dad. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, أيوة.
بس أي teacher دي؟
Yeah, بس أي black. Yeah. That's Mrs. Hildebrand. That's my old teacher. You remember her, right? Yeah. Yeah.
You should have gone with Maya.
No, thank you. Hey.
Are you ready?
Sure. Let's say that.
It's easy, huh? Piece of cake, huh?
Let's hope so. Thank you, Paul. Send that picture to me. That was good. No. Excuse me. Sorry. Excuse me. Sorry. Oh, thank you. لا هدية. Clear. No, she'll do it.
You okay? You got
Are you
this.
okay?
Just go with it.
I know, Mom.
Okay, just go.
No.
Did you tell her?
What do you mean? Did I?
Oh, you're not gonna
No,
tell
I'm
her.
just looking at
If you forget anything, just forget
Mama,
it.
I know.
I know.
Stop.
I'm nervous for you.
Yeah, stop. Get away
I'm
from me.
nervous for you.
Okay.
كده عاشوا
Here, take it.
Emily.
لا يطن. ما خبروا. Maybe they.
Did. They said 2:40 will be here.
Okay. Maybe they got the wrong place. See if they're outside. Huh? Sorry. Yeah. I think so. Hello. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, perfect timing. Thank you. Ready, Freddie? Thank you.
You've done all such good work. So, yeah.
Thank
so just
you.
breathe.
Yeah.
You know your
I'll
stuff.
get through it.
You'll thrive through it.
I'm gonna happily be able to get this. Sure, we'll say that. I've been saying. Everybody's asking, oh, hey, what? Hey, I was like, what's touching me?
Good luck.
Yeah. It's a good playground. 5 minutes. Money. Yay. I'm happy I'm last. That's all that matters. Thank you. Oh, that looks so cool. I gotta take a picture. Yeah. Yeah, they'll get me a chair after. Okay. I'll lose it. Okay. They'll get it question after? No, because I'm gonna stand for the abstract and then I'm gonna sit when they start. It's right there. Anna the Lewis. Anna. Sure. Well, tell Anna because she's the one.
We have a company teacher. Oh, okay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, find your seats. We are going to get started. This is our final defense of the day for Oriana Canoon. Oriana will have 5 minutes to present from her abstract, which is based off of her 20-page paper. And then this panel of judges, Beth Pruitt, Stephanie Geisler, and Kate Nell, will ask her 20 minutes worth of questions. So we'll begin.
And of course, loneliness can occur even when people are surrounded by others, on the subway, in a classroom, or even with their spouses and children. According to Rokach, who adds that loneliness is not synonymous with chosen solitude or isolation. Rather, loneliness is defined by people's levels of satisfaction with their connectedness and their perceived social isolation, end quote. Everyone's reality changed during the COVID-19 quarantine. There was no social connectedness. There was only isolation. Psychologists describe this phenomenon as a disruption in social homeostasis, which is the balance between connectedness and solitude, which sustains mental health. When isolation becomes prolonged, the brain's reward system for social interactions weaken, which then, in turn, deprives people of their social bonds, which then also occurs that people lose their sense of empathy and their sense of skills. This paper argues that the quarantine has mentally stunted our social skills. And the social skills I will be focusing on are emotional regulation, empathy, communication, and social cognition. It supports this idea by using psychological studies and surveys which were conducted during the pandemic and after the pandemic. It examines how, 1, how we were before the quarantine, 2, how this quarantine was a social development disruptor, 3, how technology was a double-edged sword, 4, the long-term consequences of isolation, 5, how the post-quarantine regression skills showed a deeper level of social consequences, and 7, how we can rebuild these skills then. In the pre-quarantine era, I discussed how people find comfort in their phones. They are one of the many distractions in our lives, and they have proven to distract us from conversations, which then in turn diminishes our social cognition, empathy, and communication. Then I brought up the point of how the quarantine was a social development disruptor, and how students rely on schedules and on the exposures to their peers and teachers as well. And then I brought up how the isolation shows the bad side of solitude, and how the mental health adverse of these. Isolation has led to an increase in smartphone reliance. And that is not good for our skills. It shows that we lack the empathy, the patience, and the communication that we have towards people. If the quarantine has ever taught us anything, it is that communication is not just the architecture of life, is the architecture of humanity and patience itself. Thank you. Give us like 1 second. Thank you. I have a knee injury, so excuse my sitting down.
What inspired your paper?
Usually, I don't really like writing stuff about my thoughts because sometimes I don't really know what thoughts are meant to be continued. But I saw a lot of videos about this, and through YouTube, through just social media in general, of how people were seeing this change in skills and this change in attitude. So I really was just like, wow, this is prevalent. This is something that I see in my friends and my peers and even adults around me, how people lose the sense of being able to actually communicate properly and actually continue conversations or even have conversations that actually make sense.
What did you find most surprising in your research?
That isolation has killed more people than cigarettes have, or even alcohol. It's quite literally one of the main things in just mental health that kind of kills people's ambition even, or just the will to want to live and be with other people, because the people around them haven't shown them this empathy or haven't shown them just the things that they've needed to know or needed to be talked about.
In your paper, I love your explanation of the ways technology is a double-edged sword. What stuck out to you most as you researched that aspect?
Definitely how, like I said in my abstract, a lot of people rely on phones. And yes, they have good properties. They have properties where people communicate with others. Say, for instance, if a loved one is in the hospital far away or in another completely state or even continent, that's how people communicate with others. And through phone calls, through live FaceTime, and I think that is one of the ways that smartphones are one of the greatest inventions in our century. And I think just the idea of putting smartphones above doing stuff in person or just seeing other people has kind of been one of the declines of having these phones. People tend to, like Bernadette said, in social media, like put so much effort into their personas on there, or at least just the ideas of, oh, everything is a trend. I have to be on this trend. I have to do this. I have to do that. Oh, people are doing this trend. Let me hop onto this trend. It's a bandwagon, and this bandwagon is currently crashing and burning somewhere in the Oregon Trail. So, yeah, I think smartphones.
How have you experienced this own double-edged sword in your life?
I've experienced it a lot. I've always just had this connection with, oh, if I get a phone, people will be able to talk to me. I'll be able to talk to people. I'll be able to talk to my friends. My parents, I would always go out and, you know, be with my friends around the place that we used to live. And so they didn't really have a way of communicating with me if they wanted me home or at certain times. So those were one of the ways that it kind of just derailed then into a like I said, a reliance on phones. Like sometimes, you know, in all honesty, all students use ChatGPT, and it's so pushed into life and into everybody's like education that people can't really think on their own now. It's the skills of rhetoric. People can't come up with their own ways of talking or writing in certain papers. I know most of the friends that I've had have used ChatGPT for their school essays, and was like, oh yeah, they know this. ChatGPT knows this. I'm just gonna ChatGPT it right away. Like, it's so hard to see that sometimes, because it's like, growing up in CC, we've learned on how to dive deep and break apart these things using the 16 skills, especially this year, and just being able to tear down conversations, ask different questions, ask better questions even than that question, and have those specific why question and our eureka moments. So Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading your paper, Oriana, and I think one thing I wanted to ask a little bit about and see if you understood it well was the experiment that you mentioned by Professor Rose Scott, who addressed this experiment and study over preschoolers' cognitive skills. And you talked about how there were children tested in 2 groups, and they were given false belief tasks. And that was the first time that I had ever heard about that. And so I was like, what is this? So I just wanted to know if you could define what a false belief task is, and if you were able to, through your research, figure out why that would be an important cognitive skill for us.
Yeah, that was a good question. Let me think about that. Said false belief task, right? Yes.
Yeah.
What that would entail having told kids you need to do a certain thing, but it didn't really mean anything, correct?
Yeah, so I can actually say, I'll quote what you had from the study. So there were 94 children in the first group tested. Each was given 3 false belief tasks. The child was asked where Piggy would look for the toy. If the child's false belief skills were in place, they would say Piggy would choose the first container, though the child knew that the toy wasn't there. For example, in the task Scott cited earlier, 80% of all 5-year-olds in the pre-lockdown group passed. In the post-lockdown group, the success rate fell to 63%. For 5-year-olds from lower socioeconomic homes, only 51 passed, essentially a coin flip guess, Scott said. So it's okay if this one is too hard.
No,
I was
it's
just
okay.
wondering.
Could you just re-ask the
Oh,
first
yeah.
question? Yeah.
So why do you think that would be important for, I guess, a preschooler's cognitive development? To be able to say, if someone said, there's a clown hiding behind that banner, and there's not, for them to be able to, like, still recover that information, I guess?
I think it gives these kids a sense of, one, yes, say for instance the clown banner thing, there's a danger behind there. One, are you going to be able to look for that danger or sit there and wait for the danger? I don't really have an answer for that. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think just telling the kids that one thing is this way and then changing it up on those kids and being like, oh, it's not real. Oh, it's just fake. Piggy's not there. Kind of diminishes the sense of trust that is put into kids, and kids trust their parents or who they see or their teachers, and they put that trust in them to be able to lead them and guide them, as Charlotte said in her thesis. So I think just
Well, and it was really interesting just to see how we hear about how bad smartphones are in technology, but just to see some of those little things that we don't even know we're learning as we're growing up, and how trust is established between us as well. So thank you for that. I think another question I have is just, what would you say the biggest refutation to your thesis and argument would be?
I would say that even though the quarantine had stunted our skills and was proposed as one of the biggest declines in our skills, I think it's just nowadays people have lost the ability to be able to trust one another and lost the ability to want to communicate. And now that a lot of mental health is starting to be rediscovered and starting to be researched more, I think people are finding that, one, yes, the quarantine had declined these social skills, or at least diminished them. It's not just the quarantine that made it that way. It was the influence around us. It was, yes, it was smartphones. It was social media in general. It was sometimes how like doctors and scientists, how they've been relearning more new things, influence just people's thoughts, and sometimes they would lie. And yeah, how would you trust that these doctors and scientists if you haven't did the research yourself? And I know a lot of times people are like, oh, how would you know that smartphones are bad for us? Oh, how would you know that these social skills have been diminishing? It's because you go through it. You see it in your life. You see how people are acting right in front of your face. And even if it's on social media, it's, sometimes it's real. And, even after the rise of AI and AI videos and everything like that, there's still human connection and human just raw emotion that people see through everybody's perceived just socialness and connectedness. Yeah.
Which suggestion in your rebuilding social skills is your favorite and why?
Being able to be with people, just getting out and being with your friends, having those communities even. I love communities. I just joined Harvest Young Adults community, and I love them. There are a few here. Ooh, go Harvest Young Adults. And I just appreciate how much connectedness we all have, how much kindness people show to each other. And it's because we all went through the same thing. We all went through times in our faiths. We've all went through times of hardships. We've all went through times of struggles. And always before we meet, we have highs and lows. So that's how people really get to know each other, and then ask and, be able to show empathy, to be able to want to communicate with these people, and, show encouragement and show just that you're there for them. And this community is amazing with that. I love people. I'm a people person. If you knew me, I am a people person. I love talking with people. I've always been that person who goes up to people and invites them into my friend group or invites them in. I just think it's so hard being pushed away from people, and it's so hard not seeing people who you want to connect with. And that's kind of what the quarantine took away from us. It took away our sense of connection with the people that we love. Yes, our family, we're with our family 24/7, but sometimes it festered into arguments and people pointing out their flaws and stuff. And I knew personally a few people who got divorced during the quarantine because of their just insistent connection with each other. And relationships grow when people are apart. And I think it's just sad to see how some people can't find communities when there are people who want to be together. And these people, if they just talk, they'll get together. They'll be connected. That's how people, connect. That's how people talk with other people. So, yeah.
If another pandemic were to happen or another social disruptor, what should we do differently?
That is a good question. I think we should be able to understand that we were alone. We were very lonely during this past pandemic. So being able to find ways to silence the bad thoughts, or at least silence social media in general. It was such a prevalent part in our social skill building that people just lost this want, this ambition, this need, this thrivingness for wanting to see people and wanting to actually talk with these people. And you know, if in my thesis I stated how sometimes people comment on these videos, they comment horribly, like, what if that person was right in front of your face? Would you want to say that to them? Would you want to be horribly, like, obnoxious to them? Like, no, you wouldn't want to be treated as unkind or just pushed away. So I think what needs to happen is just a, like, social cognition of this, it didn't work last time. Let's try to rebuild and make new connections and make new togetherness. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess one question I have in regards to that too is how are some ways you could share this idea with others? And do you think it's more important to share your research and what you've discovered and your thesis with parents, or is it just as important with youth and even like younger?
Yeah, I think it's very good to be able to discuss this decline with parents, because most of the time, sometimes they don't really understand how, you know, teens act or why they're acting out of place, and why sometimes they don't want to talk, and it's always been like that. Like, throughout just everybody's lives, there's always been the fact that sometimes you don't want to go to your parents to stuff because then they'll lecture you, or then they'll just be not helpful in facts. But I think being able to open up with your parents about not feeling connected with everybody, or not feeling connected with your peers or your classmates, is kind of just like one way that parents may be able to understand. And yeah, sometimes parents don't understand, but that's why you have to talk with them and be able to discuss, oh, this is what's kind of bothering me, and I haven't been able to turn away from these thoughts, or turn away from thinking like, oh, nobody will be friends with me, I don't know why nobody's friends with me, and like offer solutions, or even just offer to listen. Because most of the time, you know, people and relationships and friendships, they're always like, oh, okay, let me give advice after you've just dumped your whole heart out. And that sometimes it gets very annoying, because it's like you just want someone to listen. You just want someone to be able to open up to you and like sit there and watch them open up, because vulnerability is such a big thing, and such a big thing people hide from each other.
And reflecting on the processes in your thesis, what did you learn about yourself?
That's a fun one. I think I learned that even though some people choose to be isolated, or some people choose to not want to hang out with people, we all crave community. I mean, come on, we're the CC community. And I think just being able to open up about how things feel, or things, how people sometimes make you act, or sometimes like explaining like things is very hard for me. So I think just learning how to be able to open up to people, and be able to want to ask for help, or want to be able to communicate with people, is such a big thing. And yeah.
You did it.
Yay!
Congratulations.
Woohoo! So that was the class of 2026 senior thesis defense. Thank you all for coming.